There's an old question kicking around. If you were charged with being Unitarian Universalist in a court of law, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Which leads to another question. What does it mean to be Unitarian Universalist, to practice Unitarian Universalism? We say we focus on deeds, not creeds, but sometimes we're not terribly specific about what we mean. Or, as theologian Paul Razor asks us, what is the content of our covenant with each other? What are we promising each other? What can we expect from one another? I hope that this material will help your committee, your youth group, or board of directors to create a specific and meaningful covenant about how to practice our faith.
We cannot create prophetic church without a deeper shared understanding of what church is. We often talk about this in terms of covenant. Covenant's a good thing, it's a good tool for this. And covenant starts with the premise that we are a free church, that we have come together voluntarily around a shared set of values in order to create and sustain religious community. The problem is that our understanding of covenant too often stops with congregational polity. Now, polity matters. One of the terms of our covenant is our commitment of mutual support for each other as autonomous congregations and individuals. But covenant requires content as well as structure. If we stop with polity, we haven't really described the kind of community we have freely formed with our covenant. Now, covenant can be a tool for helping us clarify these larger questions of religious identity because if we take it seriously, we have to be clear about its terms. In other words, if covenant is based on promise, we need to be clear about just what it is we are promising each other, about what actual commitments and obligations I can expect from you and you can expect from me. At the very least, I think, our primary theological commitment should be named in our covenant. Our commitments relating to racial justice should also be named in our covenant. Think about how our approach to prophetic practice might look if we truly understood it as a covenant obligation, as one of the clauses in our contract with each other, rather than simply as volunteer work that we might or might not decide to take on. Now, of course, I don't mean to suggest that every member of our congregations would suddenly take to the streets. We all have our own gifts, and not everyone is suited for this kind of work, and we all require training and all of that. But even those whose gifts lie elsewhere would, in this sense I have, would understand and celebrate the fact that being a prophetic church is a central part of the congregation's religious identity, and that they had expressed their support for this by signing on to the covenant. Now, covenant may just be a fancy word for contract, but in religious settings, its commitments, our commitments and promises, are held to be sacred. One final point, one of the interesting features of a church covenant to undertake prophetic justice work is that it creates commitments, promises, that reach beyond the covenanting community. When we commit ourselves to create just communities and social structures, we are in effect treating our communities and the larger society, even the planet itself, as parties to our covenant, or at least it's what lawyers would call third-party beneficiaries of our covenant. I mean, this is an odd sort of commitment structure since the larger society has made no reciprocal promises to us, aside from what is promised by the First Amendment. But it's an important part of our self-understanding as a religious community. Through our covenant, we promise to each other that we will work to make the world beyond our community more just. And our covenant then becomes a mechanism for holding each other accountable for the commitments and promises we have made. Our prophetic voice is often directed outward, but it can and really should be occasionally directed back on ourselves by calling us to account for the justice work we do and fail to do. And at a deeper level, we're accountable to, and by reference to, the theological convictions by which we have named ourselves and which, for me, really constitute the heart of our covenant.
One of the concepts that I drill home with my teenagers is the concept of their increasing power and choice. When I see it, particularly in 7th and 8th grade, they come in and they're squirrels, is the language I use, and I'm sorry to be disrespectful if people hear it that way. But they come in impulsive, loud, and responding in automatic ways. And my work with them is to say, you responded in this way, which was troubling. Like we had a nonviolent workshop, nonviolent communication workshop, and the kids spoke, they were very disrespectful to a young speaker. He was rather new in his work, and the more they were energetic, the more nervous he got, and then they were like piranhas, right? And I came in afterwards and said, what would it be to be this way during a nonviolence workshop? Isn't that ironic? And they said, you thought we were being violent? And they couldn't recognize that. So in the work of conversation and the work of imagining it from the other person's point of view, they came to quite a different place. They wrote him a letter of apology and gratitude for what they did receive. They looked at what they did receive from him and imagined alternate ways they could have responded. This isn't working for me, or excuse me, I don't know what you're talking about, or even I'm bored. And in imagining that new collection of options, they grew. They closed their work by making, on their own, I didn't suggest it, a covenant for how they would be in their classroom, for renewing that. And they stuck to it. These kids are now seniors, and I can still turn to them and just make some little allusion. Boy, that is written on their heart forever, that experience. That was one moment of consciousness raising where they became aware of themselves in relation to someone else. They became aware of their set of options. They became aware of their power to choose a constructive and helpful way, even when things are rough, even when someone lets them down.
We have to take our covenants seriously. This is what happened. Of course, it was one of those busy weekends. It was Martin Luther King weekend, and I was preaching, and I was also running an auction. And what happened? Gaza and my Peace Action Group, the superstars in our program, the ones who have incredible moral authority in our community, they are, I mean, these are the most spiritual people who have, I have told people about them far and wide. They get it at every level. Gaza ripped them apart. We have Palestinian Americans in the group. We have Jews in the group. And even though the leaders in the group have all been trained in nonviolent conflict resolution, they could not handle it. These are people who have had love at the center from the very get-go. They know that love is the ground of their work. They understand this is spiritual work, and they have a covenant. Now, I tested them. I said, so, to the leaders, what are we going to do about it? And they didn't know. So I said, okay, now let's think about the nonviolent conflict resolution training. And so I asked them, what are they going to do? And they structured the dialogue questions. They understood that, and they were still insecure. And I said, so what about the covenant? And they're like, oh, the covenant, that's what we always go to. We read it, one person read every line. And we cried, and we yelled. We're not afraid of emotions. And something broke open. We stepped through that ring of fire, and at the end of that 2 hours, we were at one people again. There wasn't a person there who hadn't embraced. It was our covenant. It was our shared understanding of who we are as a religious people that allowed us to take the most volatile issue I can think of and be able to come back together in just 2-hour sessions.